All right, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. We're delighted that you're able to join us for Who's Chinatown, a virtual conference. And we've just so been looking forward to this weekend of collaborative panels and talks brought to you by Griffin Art Projects, Center A, Vancouver International Center for Contemporary Asian Art, the New Gallery, and the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, with collaborative support from T-Base, AYA, and Youth Collaborative for Chinatown. So my name's Jazz Keeler, and I'm the Contract Virtual Programs Coordinator for Griffin Art Projects. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Griffin Art Projects is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations, and we are honored and grateful to undertake our work here. So before we begin, I just have a few really quick housekeeping notes to go over, and then we'll jump right in. So first, I just wanted to mention that if you would like to see live captions displayed for this presentation, you can enable this by selecting the CC Live Transcription button at the bottom of your screen. And I'll just kind of give a disclaimer that it's not completely accurate and it is trickier with names, so particularly place names and people names, but we do hope that it will be helpful in capturing most of what we are saying today. I also wanted to mention that we will be live streaming all of the conference events on Griffin's Facebook page. And in just a moment, I'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat just for easy access. But it's good to keep in mind in case you're experiencing any audio issues or any issues at all with the Zoom interface, you will still be able to capture all of our events live from our Facebook page. And so finally, I just wanted to mention for anyone that might be new to Zoom that we are in webinar format today. And that just means that as audience members, we cannot see or hear you, even though you can see and hear us. But we do invite you to get in touch with each other and with us using the chat option at the bottom of your screen. And I also wanted to mention that at the end of this presentation, we're going to open it up to audience members for both questions and conversations. So this first launch event is all about coming together to learn about our collective hopes and goals for this weekend together. And so we did reserve that time at the end of the presentation where we would love to hear from you directly. We would love to hear about your hopes and goals for the weekend and what you're hoping to get from these conversations, and also if you have any questions for our partner organizations. So I'll just mention that for that portion, I invite you to put your questions or comments into the Q&A dialog box, which you'll actually just notice at the bottom of your screen is to the left of the chat. So it's just a separate dialog box to the left. And there'll also be the option to unmute yourself. So we always really love to hear from you directly. And if that's something you're comfortable with, you can indicate that in the Q&A dialog box, and I can unmute you when the time comes. Okay, so we're really excited to be launching this virtual conference with a warm greeting and introductory remarks from the team. We'll be hearing from Center A's Interim Executive Director, Henry Hung Liu, as well as Alan Cho, the Director of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, Griffin's director, Lisa Baldessera, and guest curator and artist, Karen Tam, who has of course curated Griffin's current exhibition, Who's Chinatown, as well as the New Gallery's director, Su Ying Strang. So thanks again to everyone for joining us here today. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first partner, Henry Hang Liu. So Henry is a curator, writer, and artist based in Vancouver and Toronto, Canada. And presently, he is curator and interim executive director at Center A, Vancouver International Center for Contemporary Asian Art. And Henry is a co-founder of Call Again, a mobile initiative collective committed to creating space for contemporary diasporic artistic practices within Canada and beyond. He has presented independent projects through numerous channels, such as Creative Time Summit, Art Museum at the University of Toronto, the New Gallery, V-Tape, and Trinity Square Video. So thank you so much, Henry, and over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Jess, for the introduction. It's always quite strange to hear like an intro of myself from other people, but quite delightful. Thank you. Really, I'm glad to be part of, me and Century are really happy to be part of Chinatown, this virtual conference that we have been planning for months. And it's really, it's so great that it came together, and then to see everybody in the attendees section. Before I begin, I would like to, on behalf of Century, would like to acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations, on which we create, learn, and live. Located in Vancouver's Chinatown, Century also acknowledges and recognizes the complex and multi-layered experiences of the individuals who have lived, built, and contributed to the vibrancy of this historic neighborhood, and those who continue to do so today. In Center A, just a little bit about who we are, is the only public art gallery in Canada dedicated to contemporary Asian and Asian diasporic perspectives since 1999. We're committed to providing a platform for engaging diverse communities through public access to the arts, creating mentorship opportunities for emerging artists and arts professionals, and stimulating critical dialogue through our exhibitions and innovative public programs that really complicate understandings of migrant experiences and diasporic communities. And our programming has been rooted in this curiosity about and an ongoing exploration of what a contemporary Asian art center can do in current times. Today we will be presenting an artist talk by our current exhibiting artist, Will Kwan. And the exhibition brings together a new body of work that kind of looks at the conditions of our economic system, and then how it produced the social relations and beliefs that are deeply rooted in the supremacy of economy. So we will have the talk just after the opening remarks. So I hope we can stay on and hear and have a conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Henry. So I'll just jump back on here. And I will now introduce our second partner. And unfortunately, Alan Cho is unable to be with us here today, but he has generously put together and offered a short introductory video, which I will share in just a moment. So born and raised in Vancouver, Alan Cho is Canadian of Chinese heritage, whose research interests are in Asian Canadian history and culture. Alan has been involved in several community organizations, including the Vancouver Asian Heritage Month Society, Vancouver Asian Film Society, Chinese Canadian Historical Society of British Columbia, and the Roadhouse Museum. After the sudden passing of his friend and mentor Jim Wong Chu in 2017, Alan has assumed the interim role of Executive Director of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, Festival Director of Glitter Asian Writers Festival, and Editor-in-Chief of Rice Paper Magazine. And Alan has published his work in the Georgia Strait, Rice Paper Magazine, Diverse Magazine, as well as short stories in the anthologies The Strangers and Eating Stories, A Chinese, Canadian, and Aboriginal Potluck. And Alan is an academic librarian at the University of British Columbia. So as I mentioned, unfortunately, Alan is unable to be with us here this weekend, but I do have a really wonderful introduction that I will share. And you'll notice as it plays that there are just a few moments when Alan's internet cuts in and out, so just keep that in mind. But really, it's a super wonderful introduction to the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop. So I will just go ahead and pull that up.
And here we are. Hi, everyone. Sorry I can't be with you here today live, but I'm really happy that I'm given an opportunity to share with you a little bit about my organization, about myself. on recorded video. But before we do, I want to recognize that we've all logged on to this webinar from different territories. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from my home here in Vancouver, British Columbia, on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. It's a particularly important time. I think this conference comes at a very important, I think, point of the world. Not only are we in a pandemic that has been terrible and ravaged the lives of all of us for the past 2 years, but ultimately it's also raised a lot of anti-Asian and gender-based violence. I think as part of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, it's really my job, I think, to be able to share with you the work that we've been doing over the past number of years, but also the reason why we need the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop and how we came to be. In the 1970s, a group of activists had come together and had a real interest in sharing their stories, but not only of themselves, but of those who had arrived in Canada before them. So these are activists like Jim Wong Chu, Sky Lee, Rick Shiomi, Terry Watata, Paul Yi. These were activists that had lived in around Vancouver, but whose roots were deeply based in what is now Chinatown and Japantown and the surrounding downtown east side. And they had always continued believing in the history of Asian Canadians as being an important fabric of Canadian history and culture. So they did a lot of activism and worked with community in Chinatown and Japantown. And that's where I think the story of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop really began in the 1970s. There's certain turning points and milestones that I want to share with you, a bit of a show and tell ACWW. In 1979, here is Inalienable Rice. This was published in 1979 of young activists in the community, and it was independently published, but it's considered the first anthology that was entirely published and written and created by Canadian writers of Asian heritage. This is really a formidable piece that really belongs in the history of Asian Canadian writing, and a lot of them had gone on to become writers themselves. Rick Shiomi had moved to the United States later on in the 1980s and is now a very well-known playwright. Sky Lee and Paul Yi, Andrew Wong Chu, Terry Watata, all became writers very well known in their genre as well. So really, that was a beginning point in the Asian Canadian writing community. I want to share with you a book that was published in 1987. This is considered one of the early writings by an Asian Canadian writer. This is Jim Wong Chu's book, and in 1987 it was published, and really he was one of the first Canadian writers of Chinese descent that had published a book of poetry in the English language. And Jim was somebody who had a day job as a letter carrier, but believed in sharing his stories and sharing his poems and also photography. And he went back to UBC creative writing and became very much a part of the publishing community, and not only published this book, but went on to edit another book along with Bennett Lee in 1992. This is called Many Mouthed Birds. It's no longer in print, I know for sure, because I've been trying to get a few more copies of this book, but it has writers that are now very well known in the Canadian literary world. In fact, I would say the international literary world. Denise Chong, Wei-Sin Choi, Sean Gunn, Lydia Kwa, Larissa Lai, Evelyn Lau, Sky Lee, Fred Waugh, Paul Yi. in fact, it's an interesting story with this anthology. This was really the first Asian Canadian book that that caught a lot of interest among mainstream publishers. And as Jim Wong Chu and the writers that were part of this anthology had done the book launch across Canada, publishers were interested. They were interested in finding writers and having them published novels, full-length novels. So one of the short stories in this collection, Many Mouthed Birds, was Wei-Sin Choi's Jade Peony, which later on in 1991 became this book, The Jade Peony. And later on, Disappearing Moon Cafe. So the 1990s was really a formative period in Asian Canadian writing, and ACWW was a part of that. In 1996, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop developed a magazine called Rice Paper. And really what it was before it became a magazine was it was a newsletter that was stapled together, photocopied, and sent out to members across Canada. But in 1996, Canada Council had granted the organization a little bit of money, and together it had created 20 years worth of magazines, and it was very well known during that time. And in 2016, the magazine had gone digital, and instead had decided that it would continue publishing anthologies, very much as it did in early days, such as this one, Alliteration, which is 20 years of Asian Canadian writing. And this is one of many anthologies that the organization had helped develop over the years. And quite recently, in 2019, the ACWW published published Immersion. And in 2021, we just published one book that will be coming out called Belief. So in many ways, the writing of Asian Canadian history has in many ways been a literary and cultural talk of a number of excellent writers over the years. And in May, we will be having Literasian Writers Festival, which was started about 9 years ago, founded by Jim Wong Chu. And we've really developed this festival to include emerging and established writers. And for this year's theme, Global Asian, we'll be having writers across the world, not just in Canada, but United States and Asia as well. So thank you for sharing your time with me. And from whatever time zone that you're in, I hope that you have a wonderful conference, you enjoy the sessions, and I look forward to connecting with you in person one day. Thank you. Take care.
Wonderful. So great that Alan was able to offer us that video. And I did want to mention that ACWW board member Ada Khan is with us as a panelist for this event. So when we get to the audience Q&A, Ada will be representing ACWW. So thank you so much, Ada. Okay, so up next, we have Griffin's director, Lisa Baldessera, as well as Karen Tam, who is an artist and curator of the Who's Chinatown exhibition at Griffin Art Projects. So Lisa Baldessera is the director of Griffin Art Projects, and she has worked as an independent curator, consultant, and writer, and in curatorial roles in public art galleries in Western Canada since 1999, including senior curator at Contemporary Calgary from 2014 to 2016, chief curator at the Mandel Art Gallery in Saskatoon from 2012 to 2014, and curator of contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria from 1999 to 2009. And Lisa holds an MFA in creative writing from UBC and an MFA in art from the University of Saskatchewan, as well as a PhD from Goldsmiths University of London. And Karen Tam is a Montreal-based artist and curator whose research focuses on the various forms of constructions and imaginations of cultures and communities through her installation work, in which she recreates spaces of Chinese restaurants, karaoke lounges, opium dens, curio shops, and other sites of cultural encounters. Since 2000, Karen has exhibited her work and participated in residencies in North America, Europe, and China. And Karen holds an MFA in sculpture from the School of Art Institute Chicago and a PhD in cultural studies from Goldsmiths University of London. So thank you so much, Karen and Lisa, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Jazz. And it's wonderful to be here with everyone. I also would like to thank Henry and Alan for their presentations and just hearing more about these wonderful organizations that are collaborating with us today. Griffin Art Projects is situated on traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Musqueam, and Stolo nations, and we are grateful to undertake our work here on the site of thousands of years of Indigenous settlement and cultural practice. We are a new gallery, a new nonprofit art residency located in North Vancouver, and we have been here since 2015. We're definitely with exhibitions, publications, public programs, as well as a residency, and we've hosted both local and international artists and curators since our inception. We were founded by Brigitte and Henning Freiby, who began collecting art in the 1970s. And collections are a core part of our practice and have been a core part of the curatorial vision as well of the Griffin Art Projects. We also have been trying to develop a much more robust public program, which you may have noticed over the last few months with help from our wonderful curator, Karen Tam, and with Jazz's incredible coordination. And it has really added the outreach. For those of you who can't visit us for all kinds of reasons in North Vancouver, you're able to participate in our work here. And we've also not launched Youth Hub, which is a new program to engage local youth on the North Shore with all of our residency artists. And that's been, it's been really successful, although online as well. And as we've been going through this pandemic year, Karen and I initially talked about this project and the residency started in March 2020, so it'll be over a year and a half ago. But the residency itself began as the pandemic was beginning to affect all of our lives. And Karen had traveled here from Montreal for the month of March to do her residency work with us, and bravely mustered on as things shut down in Vancouver during her research phase. We had planned to launch a movable feast, which was a visit to Chinese restaurants on the North Shore in person, and Karen came up with the wonderful idea of transitioning to gifts to elders and to those in need in the community as they were no longer able to leave their homes. So it's been quite a journey over the last year, and as we know, with the rise of anti-Asian racism and violence, this has become a new, not new, but newly heightened focus on what these violences mean and how we can address them in our communities. So I'm very much looking forward to the weekend and what we will be discussing. It was also such an honor to see this exhibition unfold and to see Karen's research unfold. There are 159 works in Who's Chinatown, and Karen was able to access collections that have never been seen before. And it's been just such a delight to see people coming, and probably the highest attendance that Griffin has ever had, and the discoveries that people are making, both with their own histories and their own families' collections. And Karen is going to now walk you through the exhibition. We have some slides prepared so that you can see, for those of you that are away, you can see it a bit more closely.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, my name is Karen Tam. I'm the curator of the show. And before I get started with sort of a quick kind of tour with the slide presentation, I also wanted to take a moment to as well to respectfully acknowledge the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation, the protectors of the land and waters on which Jogjaga, Montreal is located and on whose unceded ancestral land I am grateful to live and work on as a racialized non-Indigenous guest. I also want to thank Lisa and the Griffin team for all their support this past year, well, a bit more than a year, to put on this exhibition, and also to thank all the artists who are involved, the collectors who loaned their works, the institutions who also loaned items from their collections, as well as everybody who I've kind of had conversations and who really contributed to this show. And of course, all the panelists for this weekend's conference. And a big thanks to Jazz too for just all your amazing work in coordinating the public programming. So to get started, I guess to say like who's Chinatown, examining Chinatown gazes in art archives and collections, I was in my own practice as an artist, I've been thinking for many years now about in a way like cultural spaces such as Chinatowns and what they mean to us. So in the past, I've looked at, as Jazz had mentioned, like Chinese restaurants, but North American Chinese restaurants and karaoke lounges and stuff. So for this show, I wanted to look at sort of in a way pulling together a kind of art history of Chinatowns, bringing together the works of historical and contemporary Canadian artists. It had started in my research when I was just trying to find out like the earliest kind of depictions of Chinatowns. And there wasn't too much material that I found. And but what there was interesting. Like what you see here in this room is more of the historical kind of works. I've divided the exhibition into three sort of sections to reflect how a Chinatown Family Association building would have been like. So the street level would be a storefront. This first floor is like home residential, and the top floors would be more for, the society community hall. So pulling together all these works, made me think about history, who gets to be included in Canadian art history, or who gets to be included in like, public official collections and archives. And some of the artists that we see, that you'll see in the show, if you're able to visit in person, but later we'll have it as a virtual version, are, what I was struck by was just the engagement, the level of engagement that, artists such as Paul Wong with Aya Collective, Morris Lam, Mary Sui Wong, many other artists, how they've been so engaged with community, with activism, with supporting Chinatown and such. So yeah, so this is just like I guess a quick overview. And the show includes like works from bookworks and zines by Marlene Yuan, to photographs, videos, a big installation, board games, as well as artifacts and historical photographs, Chinese restaurant menus and ephemera and such. And this last one, I believe this is the last slide, are just stills from Mary Sui Wong's immersive, beautiful and moving video installation.
Wonderful. So thank you
so much, Karen. And for those of you that are in North Vancouver, I would love to see you in the exhibition. So please come, we're here until May the 3rd. And we're open for the last Saturday and Sunday of the exhibition for both days.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Karen and Lisa, for that wonderful introduction. So I will now introduce our final partner, so Sue Ying Strang, who is the director of the New Gallery. And Sue is an artist and cultural worker based in Calgary, Alberta. Originally hailing from the southern United States, Sue relocated to Canada in 2006 to pursue her education at the Alberta College of Art and Design. And Sue is the director of the New Gallery in Calgary, Chinatown, as well as the president of the Alberta Association of Artist-Run Centers and a governor on the board of Glenbow Museum. And since 2013, Sue's focus at the New Gallery has been the context of its location in Calgary, Chinatown, developing the organization's role as an active participant and striving to be a good neighbor in the community. Most recently, Sue was recognized as a fellow at the 2020 Salzburg Global Forum for Young Cultural Innovators, and other recent awards and appointments include Avenue Magazine's Top 40 Under 40 class of 2018 in the cohort of the Banff Center's Cultural Leadership Program. So thank you so much, Sue, for joining us, and over to you.
Hi, and thanks so much for that introduction, Jazz. I echo Karen's thanks as well to Lisa and the Griffin Art Projects team, and also to Karen for creating this opportunity for everyone to come together for this weekend's conference, as well as the past several months of really excellent public programming around Karen's exhibition. I feel so grateful and excited to be able to share and learn with you all over the next 2 days. I'm joining from Mohkinstsis, the Blackfoot name for this place we also call Calgary. And on behalf of the New Gallery, I'd like to express our gratitude for living, learning, and growing on this land. The New Gallery acknowledges our home on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region, including the Niitsitapi, or the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika First Nations, Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, which includes and is comprised of the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley First Nations, and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I would also like to acknowledge the many other First Nation, Métis, and Inuit who call this land home. The New Gallery is a charitable artist-run center that was established in 1975 as the Clouds and Water Gallery and Visual Production Society. We support the research, creation, and exhibition of socially relevant, politically informed creative practices from artists at all junctures of their careers. Our programming comprises a broad range of art and educational activities, including exhibitions, publications, residencies, and community collaborations. Outreach and collaborative programming in Calgary, Chinatown has been a growing aspect of the New Gallery's work over the last 5 years, and I hope this introduction can provide a bit of a primer on how the New Gallery began working with and in relation to Calgary, Chinatown. The New Gallery's current home, as Jazz said, is in Calgary, Chinatown. We relocated to the historic Canton Block in 2013 after our then home, Art Central, was slated for demolition. For those unfamiliar with the history of Calgary, Chinatown, this present day Chinatown is actually the third location, which was established around 1910, with Chinese settlers arriving in Mohkinstsis, Calgary, and the first Chinatown being established closer to 1885. The Canton Block came to be after the second Chinatown saw many Chinese settlers priced out of the location during a construction boom and railroad expansion by the Canadian Northern Railway. When relocating to present-day Chinatown, a small group of Chinese businessmen banded together to purchase land for $18,000 and build the Canton Block. There was much racial discrimination and pushback from the city council and white settlers regarding this proposed building, but eventually the project was able to move forward, allowing the Canton Block to become a cornerstone of the third and present-day Calgary Chinatown. After moving into the Canton Block, the New Gallery realized that organizational change and responsiveness to our new location was needed, and that we had a responsibility to the Calgary Chinatown community at large. Initially, this was something considering what accessibility measures could be of use for the community and how to create a space that was welcoming to local residents and businesses. We spent those first few years listening, building relationships, and dreaming up ways that this could take place. Our initial outreach attempts were fairly surface level, starting with volunteers translating signage into traditional Chinese for Cantonese speakers in the community. Later, we made an ongoing commitment to also translate all exhibition text into traditional Chinese. This work was made possible by an introduction to our longtime translator, and you just met him, Henry Hung Liu, who, along with his language and translator skills, brought a deep understanding of art history, artist-run culture, and contemporary art practices, making it possible to translate the wide-ranging texts we commissioned to accompany each of our projects. After implementing this initiative for about a year or so, we realized that making this text accessible was not enough if community members did not even know about the translated resources or even felt comfortable or interested into coming into the new gallery in the first place. Our next focus was extending focused invitations to partner organizations such as the Calgary Chinese Elderly Citizens Association, the Calgary Chinese Community Service Association, and Clover Living to bring groups of their members and residents to the new gallery for translated tours and conversations about our programming. During these tours, we provide an interpreter and talk about the artist and the exhibitions. We also answer any questions, we share tea, we have char siu bao from local vendors, and more recently, this has grew to include workshops based on feedback from some of the participants. This work has been made possible really at first by Alice Lam, one of our interpreters and a longtime Calgary Chinatown and seniors advocate. Over the past year, the New Gallery has piloted a role of community liaison filled by Christina Dongchi Yao, who has served as an interpreter and translator. During the pandemic, Christina has also been developing digital program offerings for our partners, trying out live stream lectures and workshops, virtual tours of our exhibitions, and translating our digital catalogs, which is another virtual initiative from the New Gallery, created by our staff, Nivedita Iyer and Brittany Nickerson. Most recently, we put out a call for members for a new Chinatown Community Elder Circle. This group will advise on the New Gallery's future outreach programming and relationships in Calgary Chinatown. Throughout our time in Calgary Chinatown, the New Gallery has also participated in projects led by others in the community, things like neighborhood cleanups, festivals, and advocacy campaigns. It was important that the New Gallery didn't just make our work accessible to community members, we also really needed to show up for Calgary Chinatown and participate in the important long-standing community programming to listen, learn, amplify, and offer support when needed. This continues to be integral work for the New Gallery to prioritize. A major project that we've just wrapped was developed collaboratively with I Love YYC Chinatown, which is a really wonderful youth-led collective. And this partnership framework is an example of where our relationship building and collaborations in Calgary Chinatown are going. It's not just about making our programming accessible, and it's not just about showing up to other community programs. It's about bridging our work and finding those commonalities to deliver something that is representative of all the folks involved. When we first started discussing what kind of project we'd like to do together, it was important for us to align with I Love YYC Chinatown's key objectives: cultural exchange and preservation, bridging the intergenerational gap, and dedication to community, as well as the New Gallery's mission to create opportunities for socially relevant and politically informed art. The resulting project brought together a group of 6 multi-generational writers: Ben Shui, Calvin Jim, Helen Hu, Steph Wong Ken, Teresa Tam, and Yi Yang. The group toured and experienced various aspects of Calgary Chinatown together over the course of a weekend. This included visiting some of the nonprofit organizations, associations, and businesses, participating in workshops, sharing meals and time together over the weekend. These writers then spent a few months working together as peer mentors, supporting each other in developing their own creative work that reflected their experience in Calgary Chinatown. They each came up with a distinct text, and the resulting publication, called Lemon Chicken Association, which is also their chosen collective name, features each writer's work in English, simplified, and traditional Chinese. The digital launch of this publication, designed by Nivedita and translated by Henry, launched about a month ago at Printed Matter Virtual Art Book Fair and is currently being freely distributed online. The print version will be released and freely disseminated later this month, so please stay tuned if you'd like to receive a copy of that. Another recent collaborative project you'll hear more about later in this conference is the Calgary Chinatown Artist Residency. I won't share anything about that project today, as I hope you'll tune in on Sunday to hear directly from our 3 artists, Teresa Tam, Annie Wong, and Cheryl Wingsy Wong. While artist-run centers often have community-driven mandates, I believe that this value has expanded exponentially for the New Gallery as a direct result of joining the Calgary Chinatown community, where we have benefited from the generous teachings from community members and partners who have gotten involved with our organization. over the last several years and who have been dedicated members and community builders in Calgary Chinatown for multi-generational since 1910. As the diversity of voices involved with our organization have expanded, the types of programs the New Gallery has supported have also shifted. And this has really encouraged the New Gallery to open up new ways of working beyond our historical programming frameworks. When the conference organizers sat down together and asked, what are our hopes and goals for this weekend? What came to mind was a similar type of coming together where we can share space, resources, collaborate, and learn from and with a group of folks who share some of the same values to dream up new futures together. As Alan and Lisa articulated, the past year of increasing violence, blatant hatred and racism, and the continually evaporating safety for so many in our communities makes these acts of gathering that much more important. To be visible and to take up space, to support one another, to amplify the often unrecognized work of communities of color. These are some of the goals of this weekend. I also hope that all presenters and attendees are able to connect with someone, find an idea that resonates with them, gives them hope or inspiration for the days and weeks and years ahead. The work of community building is collective, and we must share with and learn from one another to do this. I also hope you're all able to support the Chinatowns in your respective communities in some way, as a patron during our informal chat and choose this weekend, or by volunteering, donating, or sharing the work of the many wonderful collectives, organizations, and advocates organizing to protect our communities and kin. A big thank you to all the contributors, all the partners, and to each of you out there. I'm looking forward to spending more time with you each this weekend.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sue. So we do have some time to open it up to the audience. And before we do so, I did just want to introduce ACWW board member, Ada Khan. And Ada will be joining us for the audience Q&A and audience conversation that we'll be hosting in just a moment. So Ada is a graduate of the University of British Columbia and has been an active community member for many years. Since her retirement after 35 years serving in various library roles in the Fraser Valley Regional Library, she returned to her family home in Chinatown and currently participates and volunteers in numerous book clubs, organizations, and festivals. Ada currently serves on the board of the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, Pacific Canada Heritage Center, Museum of Migration, and Vancouver Moving Theatre. So thank you so much, Ada, for joining us for this audience component. And I will now invite all of our presenters to turn on their videos and mics, and we'll gather here for this audience component. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we would love to hear from audience members. So do feel free to type any questions or comments into the Q&A dialog box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen to the left. As well, when you have the opportunity to unmute yourself. So if you feel comfortable with that, we'd love to hear your voice, and just go ahead and indicate in the Q&A that you'd like to be unmuted, and I can go ahead and do so. So I will now regroup all of our presenters. And I will just be on here with my voice. So if you feel more comfortable writing your questions or comments, I'm happy to moderate them. But if not, I'm also very happy to unmute you. So it looks like we have a first question here for Karen. And Karen, are there plans to tour your exhibition?
Thanks for your question. And we have talked about touring the exhibition, and the Griffin, Lisa and the Griffin and I are planning. We're in the kind of beginning stages of preparing and reaching out to different venues across Canada, because I think it's really important if to continue these conversations, but like how they can kind of how the exhibition can expand, or how it can change, you know, in each venue. Say, like if we're able to go to Edmonton, for example, and to include you know, local artists, right? Or if we go to Montreal, same thing, include local artists, and to also involve the local some of the local organizations and community there, and to maybe, yeah, to kind of do that and build upon this project. So I guess I'll put it out there if anyone has, you know, if you want this show, please bring us to you.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like we have a question for Karen from Jeanette. So Jeanette, just give me one moment here, and you should be able to unmute yourself if you would like to ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, Karen. My question is this. I'm sure in your research, because you're from back east, you must find there's common elements between our Chinatown and the Chinatown you come from. My question is, what was the most distinguishing difference that gives our Chinatown a particular identity versus, say, a Chinatown, for example, in Calgary, a Chinatown in Toronto? What do you find the most distinct in terms of giving our Chinatown an identity here?
Thank you for your question. I haven't been to that many Chinatowns, but I can for sure talk about Montreal. And I guess, I mean, I spent some time in Toronto because I have family there, and I keep coming back to Vancouver, I think almost every year. So I guess what I've noticed, perhaps it's because, you know, the Chinatown in Vancouver is the oldest, you know, and because of that historical kind of establishment, and perhaps the population is so much bigger than the Chinese population in Montreal, right? That I guess one thing that I really admire is how much energy and effort the Vancouver Chinatown community has put into kind of in a way emphasizing, you know, their history and bringing, like, revitalizing in a way, you know, what has gone before, the arts and culture, and to bring people back. I think also the other thing too in Montreal is I don't think we've experienced until now, like until the past year or two, sort of the development of luxury condos. I mean, now there's two, I think there's two or maybe three luxury condos in Montreal Chinatown that are being built, and so there's pushback now from the community regarding that. And I guess yeah, that's really what I can say. I mean, maybe Henry. Can I bring Henry into this conversation, and Su Ying, because I mean, Henry's lived in Toronto and now Vancouver, and so he could maybe talk a little bit more, and Su Ying could talk about how Calgary is different.
Thank you. Yes, I did live in Toronto for quite a while, and I think that every city's Chinatown has its own history. So I think that the current Chinatown we're talking about the Spadina and College area Chinatown. It's according to the late Dr. David Lai, it's replaced Chinatown because the initial Chinatown, where the initial Chinatown was situated in, called the Ward, was demolished to make way for the construction of the new Toronto City Hall. And so we see that there is this the move of the Chinatown, and then also in different areas of the greater Toronto areas, there is the East Chinatown. So we're talking about the Broadview Avenue area, Broadview Avenue area. And so it's kind of scattered around, but we also talk about the malls. For example, what we call the Pacific Mall, the P Mall, what we call dearly. It's at the intersection of Markham and Scarborough. So there's all of these, I would say, quote unquote clusters, and really to think about urbanization and then the history of Toronto. I think that case was quite interesting. And Century is in Vancouver's Chinatown, and then we, what I found quite striking when I first got to Vancouver was how there is this very consistent cultural heritage in the neighborhood that still thrive like under different kinds of conditions nearby in the Chinatown area. And then we talk about Japantown, and then how gentrification and a lot of other issues that kind of affecting these areas. And then of course there is the Dr. Sun Yat-sen Garden just down Kiefer and Pender. And that to me was quite a landmark, and such existence that really speak to the inhabitants of this area, and how really to me it's quite a statement as well. It's a cultural statement that really that cannot be erased. So I think these are the two Chinatowns that I know the most. But I think that each Chinatown had its own characteristics, and of course, what I think what's prevalent in I guess the construction and the appearance of Chinatowns is that there is this cultural symbols for economic survival.
For sure. I'll just jump back into like thank Imogen and Henry for pointing out my error. I meant to say, I didn't mean to say Vancouver had the oldest Chinatown. I meant to say Vancouver was old, its Chinatown was older than Montreal's. Of course, Victoria is the oldest one. So thank you for correcting me there.
Wonderful. So we have an audience member. Wiley, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Sure, yes. My question is for actually all the panelists. I was reading Paul Yee's Saltwater City, and I was quite struck by the fact that he observes this cultural gap between the first wave of Asian settlers who came to North America before 1923 or the Exclusion Act, and then of course were basically locked out for a generation, and then the second wave who came after about 1950, I think. And it was a really obvious, in hindsight, observation that hadn't never occurred to me. And so I guess I wondered if you see this at work in your artistic practices and how you negotiate this.
I can take a first go at it, and actually this kind of ties into my my response and thinking around the last question as well, which, by the way, Jeanette, was one of the questions I had for our artist in residence for our panel tomorrow. So there'll be some perspectives from New York Chinatown as well as Toronto Chinatown coming into that conversation. But to go back to this question around multi-generational or multiple waves of immigration perspectives, I think that for me, really, the context of the work, the way we're communicating and connecting with folks, and really communities of Chinatown, they're all made up of people, and for certain, that the different kind, whether it's language and different dialects from different waves of folks immigrating over, whether it's different regions, different socio-economic statuses, et cetera, is all impacting, I think, the way that the New Gallery is doing public outreach in Calgary, Chinatown. And I certainly think that the context of Calgary has a lot of impact on how Calgary, Chinatown has shaped and formed. We definitely have a number of waves of immigration. And then there's the broader socioeconomic and sociopolitical forces of Alberta and Calgary at play here. I think really one of the reasons that Calgary Chinatown, this third iteration of the community, has been able to hold fast is because of community members coming in. And of course, there's the Canton Block that was created that I mentioned earlier, but also in the 80s, the Calgary Chinese Cultural Center, and also the Calgary Elderly Citizens Association, both decided to create pretty significant buildings along the borders of Calgary Chinatown, which has helped prevent some of the erosion. And I think it's the visions of Chinatown from those individuals, the goals from those individuals, which has really helped shape what Calgary Chinatown looks like. And that is continually changing. I think it might have been the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop panel that's happening that talks a little bit about that as well, and how these places are always shifting and responsive. So the youth, I see so many youth collectives that are coming in. That's a whole nother generation, maybe not necessarily specifically an immigration wave, in some cases, yes, that are really changing, I think, the makeup and the goals and the futures of Chinatowns all over North America.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we are just about at the end of our time, but I do think we have time to squeeze in just one more question before we break, before we part for a quick break. So we have a question from an audience member named Walter. And Walter, you should be able to unmute yourself. So go ahead and give that a try.
Good. I think it did work. My bandwidth is a bit crap, so we'll have to see what happens. I was just musing, folks, and I don't know whether it's a comment or a question, but there's a certain, I don't know, it feels like a zeitgeist going on, because we have the Chinese Canadian Museums, a place at the table in the two sites in Vancouver, Karen's Griffin Project, Paul Yee speaking tonight for the Chinese Canadian Historical Society, ACAMS at UBC, Catherine's recent Yu Cho Chow exhibit, the amazing youth collectives that are happening. You know, at one point this was all quite ghettoized and quite marginalized, and I wonder, you know, have we become mainstream yet? And it died.
Hi, Walter.
Hi, Karen.
I'd love to think that we are, but I think we're moving towards becoming mainstream. I don't think we're there yet. I think it's just so wonderful that there's all this kind of renewed energy and like everyone just, you know, across the country or kind of dealing with and working through the same issues or similar issues. So I mean, that's all I wanted to say, but thank you for your comment. Lisa, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I'll just respond quickly. Walter, hello, not just because we share the same birthday, but you know, I was just gonna say, I think coming from a museum perspective, that, you know, especially spending 10 years at the Greater Victoria, where there's an immense collection of Asian art, I think that weekends like this weekend and the movement of cultural practices discussion and really unraveling some of the colonial kinds of frameworks that have tended to exist especially around early collections of Asian material in Canadian museums. I think that the discourse is shifting around them so that we're starting to really problematize those earlier colonial art historical narratives. And I think this kind of zeitgeist that you're talking about is so crucial because it's multi-generational and it's living, moving cultural discursive space, and it's not fixed. And I think that's such a crucial element of what's happening now, especially over the last 5 years, and in the last year of really starting to understand how those discursive spaces, how museums play a role in fixing identity or in understanding it in terms of that colonial context.
I'd love to just jump in really quickly. Lisa, that really resonates with me. And also, Walter, your point about all these amazing youth-led initiatives and multi-generational initiatives that are popping up are so crucial. And I think that we've seen a real shift in use in many of our Chinatowns, a real shift in resident makeup. We see an aging demographic of residents as well. And I think there's been a real call to action as we look across these changing makeups and uses of the purposes Chinatowns used to serve and the purposes they serve in a contemporary context. We look at a lot of the tongs and family associations and these community spaces that have an aging membership. And there's a need to either pass the baton, to imagine, what the future caretakers of these communities are, to collaborate, to ensure that, if a lot of those histories are not accurately kept in the quote unquote, official archive, we need to be able to share those, whether it's orally, whether it's informally, whether it's doing the research and the work and doing it whatever formally might look like. Those are all questions that I think are really, really coming to a head. I know in Calgary, Chinatown, a lot of our community spaces, a lot of that more public space versus commercial or shop space is mostly focused on an older demographic, and we want to make sure that there remains community space for future generations, and that Calgary Chinatown doesn't completely erode away to commercial space.
Wonderful. So I'm going to jump back on here because we have come to the end of our time, but a huge thank you to everyone who asked questions and to everyone who joined for this conversation, as well as to our partners for their wonderful introductions. So that concludes our introductory event.